what is the most coveted thing in Pokémon from an out-of-game perspective? It's a question the answer of which has constantly shifted over time. When Gen 1 was brand new, it was probably the same thing as in-universe, being legendary Pokémon, which were one time only, and the Master Ball, of which only one existed. But over time, these two lost their value. Shiny Pokémon became even more elusive than something that was at least guaranteed, and with the rise of genning, hacking and tools like Action Replay and Game Shark, Master Balls and rare Pokémon could be obtained by the press of a button. I mean, literally, one guy with an Action Replay on your playground back in the day would change the entire Pokémon economy of the school on his own. With the increased focus on competitive starting around Gen 5 and continuing onto the 3DS, factors that are passed on through breeding became more desirable, like hidden abilities and Moncod and Apricorn balls. And whenever a new game released, for a moment there, non-English Ditto were very desirable. But going into the Switch era, this is all well and proper changed. At this point, the 3DS had become a playground for gent, cloned and inserted event Pokémon that made names that are supposed to be hard to get, like the Cat Pikachu or Vivillon with a Pokeball pattern, pretty easily attainable, and even if you don't know how to create or clone these Pokémon yourself, you would still notice the value of these Pokémon in trading communities dip as a result. The age-old rule of increased supply means lower price applies to Pokémon as well. And on the Switch, it isn't much different. The console had been compromised, so to speak, before Sword and Shield even released, so when the DLCs were brand new, getting your hands on Iron Boulder, Gouging Fire, Spectrier or Glastrier wasn't really that hard, as long as you mentally accepted you would probably be getting a cloned or gent legendary rather than one someone caught legitimately. Side note, but it's gotta be really interesting to see how Winds and Waves turns out in this aspect, as the Switch 2 is much better protected than the original Switch. It may prove a long time before cloned or gent Pokémon are even possible on there. But in that light, we have already seen a little precursor to that. Because even though there is not a single Pokémon game out there on a console that isn't compromised, one Pokémon still proved ungenable, unclonable. And that Pokémon as a result became the most sought after name in the world. It wasn't even remotely unique, you could breed it to your heart's content, but that didn't change the fact Furfrou was the most coveted species in the franchise. An entire economy was created around it, only for the Furfrou market to have now completely crashed. Let's take a look at how this all came to be. Now, I'm gonna assume that if you're watching this, you know Furfrou is a Gen 6 Pokémon, which in my eyes makes this only more interesting. After all, it means it's far from a recent Pokémon at this point. It's 4 generations old and has had both the 3DS and the Switch to become as common as a random Route 1 rodent. And in essence, it is. Normal Furfrou is not worth much and never was. Sure, it was a little pain to get onto your Switch, as it has only appeared in X and Y and Ultra Sun and Moon and not the Switch games, but getting it from Pokémon Bank to Home is easy enough, and especially on the 3DS, obtaining it is not remotely difficult. But it isn't the normal Furfrou we're talking about here. As you probably also know, Furfrou has several different forms, 9 in total, known as trims, that can be obtained by getting it groomed. This was only possible on the 3DS, even in ORAS, where the Pokémon itself wasn't natively available, and there we start to see the problem. You see, while Pokémon Bank also had a national dex for you to work towards, the way this dex worked is that it scanned a copy of your 3DS game and entered the dex entries you had obtained automatically. That means that you didn't necessarily have to move your Pokémon to Bank in order for them to be registered, but it also meant you lost your progress when you started a new save on your cartridge. This last part is probably a big reason why its successor, Pokémon Home, did things a little differently. From now on, Home would no longer access the dexes from your games, and instead permanently register any Pokémon you moved into Home. It doesn't matter where it came from, it doesn't matter who the original trainer was, if you moved the Pikachu to Home, your Home dex showed you had caught a Pikachu. And Home's dex was certainly more elaborate than Bank's ever was. It tracked much more than Bank did, including moves, abilities, shinies and separate forms, and there are actual rewards for completing it too, ranging from small stuff like achievements to actual rare Pokémon like original Magearna or shiny legendaries for the game dexes. Point being, Pokémon Home encourages you to catch them all, and even keep a living dex much more than Pokémon Bank ever did. And that is important to remember when we get to the real problem. Because Pokémon Bank had access to the individual game's dexes, it was able to track elements that Home cannot, or at least could not. This includes special forms like Mega Evolutions. Even though you obviously can deposit a Mega Stone because it is an item, Bank could read your dex data to see what Megas you had obtained. Home couldn't, and so inserting a Pokemon capable of Mega Evolution would automatically register the Mega as well, even if, say, your Garchomp came from Legends Arceus. This has now changed with Legends ZA, which is the first game Home can actually read data from, but more on that later. Another example is Castform. The Alola games track its various forms separately, but you cannot put them in Bank. However, they do have separate entries in the Pokemon Bank Pokédex because, like I said, Bank can read your Sun and Moon data. Because of this same principle, Furfrou's different trims are also trackable by Pokemon Bank and included in the National Dex, despite the fact that their trim reverts back to normal upon sending them to Pokemon Bank. And here lies the core of the problem. Pokemon Home essentially just copied Pokemon Bank's National Dex and then obviously expanded on it with new Pokemon like Meltan and Melmetal, which are unavailable on 3DS, as well as the Gen 8 Pokemon of course. But they made a teeny tiny, very crucial decision in how to treat these untransferable forms. Send the Castform to Home and you get Dex entries for all its weather-based forms. Send the Furfrou to Home and you only get one, the standard one. In order to fully complete your Home National Dex, which again Home encourages you to do much more than Bank ever did, you need to put Furfrou with each of its trims into Pokemon Home. And because trims revert upon being put in Pokemon Bank, you cannot use your 3DS for this process at all. Now, you may be thinking, okay, so you can't get a trimmed Furfrou into Pokemon Home, that sucks, another victim of Dexit, but how can you have a so-called economy driven on something that doesn't exist? Well, there's the kicker, you can get a trimmed Furfrou into Pokemon Home, it's just incredibly annoying. Because Home is not only in contact with the other Switch games and Bank, it can also take in Pokemon from Go. And Pokemon Go has a different way of dealing with Pokemon forms. Pretty much every Pokemon that can change forms in the core series is permanently stuck in its form in Go. That goes for Castform, that goes for Deoxys, that goes for Cherim, it goes for pretty much all of them. You catch them in a certain form and then they are permanently that form. And you guessed it, this applies to Furfrou too. Sort of. Because unlike many of these other examples, you actually can change Furfrou's form in Pokemon Go, but just like the others, it sticks around. Even when you transfer it to Home, this trim sticks. It's a bizarre decision that essentially locks unique Pokemon forms for your National Dex behind Pokemon Go. And it gets even worse when you hear the stipulations behind the various trims. Because it's not as simple as a visit to a groomer, far from it. First of all, you need Furfrou candy. Not the worst thing in the world, but it does mean you need to find more than one Furfrou, which may prove difficult depending on where you live. Secondly, which form of Furfrou you can choose depends on your location too. Matron and Dandy are available worldwide, but the rest are location bound. Debutante is exclusive to the Americas, Diamond to Europe, Africa and the Middle East, Star is for the Pacific regions in Asia, Kabuki for Japan, Pharaoh for Egypt, La Reine for France, and Heart can be obtained worldwide, but only when the Valentine's Day event is active. This is insanity. If you are not one of the roughly 70 million living in France, you either need to visit it or find out how to spoof the location of your phone, or you can forget about getting La Reine Furfrou for your National Dex. Or you can trade for it. And this, my friends, is the Furfrou economy. A regular Furfrou is worth nothing. A Matron or Dandy Furfrou, the ones available worldwide, it was worth an annoying Pokemon to catch, so think Ursaluna or Goldengo. Debutante and Diamond were pretty much just as common since a big part of the Pokemon community lives in those areas of course, and Kabuki was also usually pretty doable if you knew where to look. Pokemon is obviously massive in Japan, so there were Kabukis aplenty, and while Debutante and Diamond may not be rare, they are still unavailable in Japan, so it wasn't too difficult to find someone who would consider that a fair trade. But the other four, those are worth their weight in gold. Even though France is a big market for Nintendo, the population is simply so small compared to the rest of the entire globe that La Reine Furfrou would easily net a shiny Pokemon on Home's global trade service. Same thing with Star. A lot of people live in the rest of Asia, but it's not Pokemon's biggest market in the world, so supply didn't meet demand there. But the final answer to the most coveted thing in Pokemon, it was Pharaoh Furfrou and Heart Furfrou, the latter more so in the fall when Valentine's Day was far away. I remember stacking up on hard Furfrou during Valentine's Day 2023 and then putting them on home during the end of the year when, due to the lack of a new Pokemon game, I started focusing on finishing my living form decks. And I'm not lying to you, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my collection of hard Furfrou. Hard to get mythicals, seconds of Pokemon you only get one of but need more of, like Urshifu and Enamorus, the legendaries from the other game's versions. I even got some shiny legendaries for my Furfrou troubles. And of course I traded one of my hard Furfrou for a Pharaoh Furfrou. I don't think there has ever been a more valuable Pokemon in the history of this series, especially not when you only count regular Pokemon, so not mythicals and legendaries. It was so bad that people started using Furfrou like a safety measure to show off their Pokemon. I don't know what kind of person would do this, but people would show off, say, a shiny Pokemon they caught and ask for a Pharaoh Furfrou in return. They knew they were never gonna get it. That is just how elusive it was. It was the equivalent of an impossible Pokemon, like a level 1 Charizard. It was all supply and demand, and the demand for these Furfrou was much, much higher than the supply. But that changed basically overnight. No one, absolutely no one, expected a return to Kalos to be on the cards, but Legends EA proved exactly that. Its announcement and subsequent trailer, which confirmed Furfrou for the game, already caused the Furfrou market to dip a little in anticipation of what was to come. And then, when Legends EA actually released in October 2025, the writing was on the wall. You can change Furfrou's forms in this game, and data was found that suggested very strongly that when the Pokémon Home compatibility would eventually come to Legends EA, you would be able to transfer your trimmed Furfrou to Home and retain their trim, which proved correct in April this year. Pokémon Home's Furfrou economy crashed. Supply grew massively in the span of one day, and demand was basically gone, with a new mainline game making Furfrou's trims very accessible. Search for Furfrou on Pokémon Home today and all you'll see is people asking for normal Pokémon, for even Pharaoh Furfrou, or folks who are stuck in the past and still expect others to trade their eternal Flower Flowhead for a bang average dog with a funny hairstyle. For a moment there, Furfrou was on top of the world, the most coveted Pokémon in existence. But those days are no more. Currently, the most coveted Pokémon is probably Eternal Flower Flowhead, but the fact it can be gent on 3DS or cloned on Switch means it's not at the same level as Pharaoh or Hard Furfrou were. But like I said earlier, winds and waves may be able to top it. 0 vulnerabilities in the Switch 2 means no genning, no cloning, so if Gen 10 introduces a new super limitedly available legendary, good luck trading for it. Were you out there getting or sending away your Furfrou? What did you trade for it? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. And if you're also interested in either the Mario or Fire Emblem series, you may want to check out my other channels, Pichupedia and Nagapedia. Links are in the description. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.